G'day and welcome. Thanks again for joining me today. It was my real pleasure to have a conversation with Will Fowles. Will's the member for Ringwood in the Victorian State Parliament. Great chance for me to get a bit of an insight into what it actually looks like for an MP. We've had a few candidates on and now we get to see the other side of the fence as well. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, Will, thank you very much for joining me today. It's really great to have an MP on to talk about what an MP actually does.
Sure
You
thing.
guys are
Absolute
in
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
No stress at all. You guys are in a really weird position. I was thinking about this earlier today when I was kind of coming up with how I wanted to approach this, where every couple of years you're asked to participate in a literal popularity contest, but the average punter, and I include myself in this, actually has very little idea of what you actually do. What should we be actually thinking about when we vote for you? So I wonder if you could give us a bit of a gist of what is the daily life of a state MP actually look like.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here and sharing some thoughts with your viewers. Look, the day-to-day life of an MP is pretty well recorded these days because we're all pretty prolific social media users. But of course, what you're seeing there is, I guess, the selected highlights rather than the kind of the bits of the job that are a bit more routine or a bit more of a grind, even sometimes. But broadly speaking, we have two roles. One is the role to be an advocate for our local community and to deal with constituents in our community having a problem, irrespective of what it's about, whether it's a problem with, housing or dealing with the health system or a complaint about something that's happening or an interest in a particular bill or a law that we're debating. And that's a full-time job. And then in addition to that, over and above the full-time local advocacy job, we have this pretty weird part-time job, which is being a parliamentarian. And uh, parliamentarian, the parliamentarian role is quite different in that it's a different workplace. You have different workmates. It uses an entirely different skill set. And there is, of course, a bit of overlap because we bring what we have as local members. We bring that to the parliamentary and legislative process, but it really is quite a different role. And that's what sort of keeps it exciting, I guess, is that you do have these two quite different roles. And but I think at the end of the day, most MPs would tell you that it's the work in their local community that brings them the greatest satisfaction and joy because it's getting stuff done.
And I'm not surprised by that, even in the slightest. My general sense of Parliament, just watching it every now and then, is that there's a lot of that sort of pomp and pageantry sort of thing that we've seen even recently with the coronation and so on, where you have this guy with a big mace and he kind of puts it down on the thing. And I guess how much of what happens in Parliament is, as you've said, getting stuff done versus running through those sort of processes that, for good reasons, have to happen. What's your experience in that?
Yeah, look, I think the parliamentary work is varied, even within that Parliament being different to our work in our local electorates. And I guess some of it is the stuff we get to say about what's happening in our local electorate. Some of it is asking questions of ministers or seeking actions from ministers about things that affect our local communities. But then other times you're simply advocating a position on a particular bill. And I'm in the lower house, so we're the House of Government. So we only debate government bills. We don't sort of have private members' bills or other sorts of motions coming up. So when I'm advocating the lower house, I'm supporting the government position. That's the way we operate, at least in the Labor Party. Um, but there are any amounts of nuance on these bills. Sometimes some of them are really boring. I'll be clear. We did a statute amendment bill the other day that was literally basically cleaning up typos in a bunch of different acts, and it's very hard to speak for 10 minutes on those things. But if we're speaking about something like medically supervised injecting rooms, that's an issue that I've taken a very strong interest in over the course of the last 20 years, and I was pleased to be able to support that legislation because I think it's an important reform. I think putting people's health first and not viewing the actions of those who are struggling with addiction just through a criminal lens. I think that's really important.
Mm, mm. And the impression that I've got, not just from you, but with other, I guess, potential candidates that I've spoken to, is that there's not a lot of careerism in politics. It seems like pretty much everyone I've spoken to has a real drive to actually bring in change and make their communities a better sort of place. I wonder if you could talk to what got you involved in politics in the first place.
Sure. Well, I might start with your careerism comment. I think there is a bit of careerism in politics. I think politics, the workplace is a bit unique because kind of everyone wants everyone else's job a bit.
Sure.
There are very few people in the lower house who, if offered the job of premier, would say no. I think everyone has that aspiration to maximise their influence so they can deliver on the things that are important to them and are important to their communities. So I think everyone does come in with a sense of what role you need to do to be able to affect the most change.
Mm.
But you're absolutely right that people come in with a view to making change. I think overwhelmingly on both sides of the aisle, people come in as genuine, community minded, wanting to get stuff done. We, of course, have a different philosophical basis for the things we consider important and what we would like to do in the respective areas of interest. But people do come in with that genuine belief that they can try and move the needle on some of the issues that are important to them. And I guess I always had, extending back from my 25 years or so inside the Labor Party, I always had a view about fairness, about making sure that the social justice imperatives were dealt with and respected. That we deliver a society ultimately that's more equitable. I've led by and large a very fortunate life, but I know that many others have struggled with homelessness and an inability to access safe healthcare when and where they need it. Those sorts of things are really, really important to me as a public official, and they're the things that I was always keen to prosecute, keen to bring forward into a parliamentary environment. Now, we don't as individual parliamentarians have carriage of all of those issues, but we do have the ear of ministers, and we do have the ability as backbenchers to raise issues and to make sure that sun shines upon those things which are important to us. And that's the reason I got involved, and I'll continue to advocate for the things that I particularly consider important, which are things like mental health reform, housing and homelessness, and taking real action on climate change.
Mm. And you're a member of the Labor Party. You're a MP under the Labor Party banner, I guess. What kind of initially attracted you to those ideas? Has that changed? I think you've said you've been a member for 25 years or something now. Has that changed over that 25-year time? And kind of what's next? What do you think is happening next for the Labor Party?
Sure. So, I got involved when I was a student at Monash University, and there were sort of two main political groupings on campus, really, I guess, three. And I just found that the Labor students that I was dealing with shared a similar worldview to me at the time. This is sort of 1997, 1998. At the time, we were pretty unhappy with the Kennett government. We were pretty unhappy with the Howard government. There was lots going on. So I guess in some respects, I'm a creature of opposition in that I came to Labor in part because of what Labor stood for, but also what they stood against. And I saw the demonisation of refugees under the Howard government, the cutting of mental health support services and the like under the Kennett government, the stripping out of a whole bunch of parts of the public transport system under the Kennett government, privatisations. These were things that I immediately saw an impact in the community that I was then part of, which was the student community, and wanted to do something about. And Labor became the natural home for me. And I was fortunate enough to ultimately go on to become the president of the student union at Monash Clayton. And it was a great experience, fighting for students every day and running a pretty substantial organisation as a 21-year-old was a great experience.
Yeah, that's something else, isn't it? There are not many 21-year-olds I could think of that I would kind of trust to run an organization like that. But look, it worked out, I guess, for you in the end. So
yeah,
probably a good start. I wonder, you mentioned a couple of names there, Kennett, Howard. I think a big criticism that happened of both of them is that they kind of hung on too long. They couldn't really adapt to changing circumstances. We've seen, obviously, the Andrews government's been in for a while now, 8 years, something like that. And we're entering really a big shift nationally, state level, in politics. I guess what's the focus for the Andrews government moving forward? How are you guys going to adapt to these changing circumstances, and what does that look like?
Sure. Look, the Andrews government, yes, has now secured 3 election victories. We're 9 years into this term of office, and we will eventually be 12 years in office. That will make us the longest serving Labor government in the history of the state. And that's a big honour, but it comes with a big responsibility. And I think if there's one thing that the Premier has been clear on, and certainly I've been clear on, is that we will not waste a day in government. It is absolutely imperative that if you get this great opportunity, this unbelievable gift to govern in the interests of all Victorians, you need to use it. Our opponents typically, their goal in life is to have us not governing, not to actually deliver anything themselves, not to deliver a program for change, but simply to keep us out of office. That is an aspiration that is defined in the negative. We take a very different view. We define our aspiration in government in the positive. It's the things we wish to deliver, and whether in my patch it's the rebuilding of the Maroondah Hospital, or the delivery of the level crossing removals, or right across the state, whether it's the suburban rail loop, the metro rail tunnel, whether it's the Northeast Link. These are major projects, and they're projects that frankly should have been done a long time ago. But it's this government that is cracking on and getting those things done, in addition to building 100 new schools and revamping every school in the state. I mean, these are very, very large commitments, but it takes a government of energy and passion and determination to see those things through, and that's why I'm so proud to be part of the Andrews Labor government.
And you mentioned, talking of those opposite, that they kind of define themselves in the negative in that sense. And I'm really struck at the moment how disorganized they're kind of coming across. As much as I'm a member of the Labor Party, I believe in Labor values, I still want to have a strong opposition who can kind of call the government to account. And I look at the group that's there and kind of their inability to do that. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on what they're meant to be doing, why they can't do it right? What's happening over there?
Yeah, look, they're, to use a line from that great Armando Iannucci series, The Thick of It, they are an omni-shambles. They're in all sorts of bother at the minute, and for the partisans, I guess there's a temptation to sort of go, "Oh, isn't this great?" because they're all at sea. And look, undoubtedly, there's a bit of Schadenfreude there. I can't pretend to not have had moments of glee as we watch them falling to pieces. But at the end of the day, the strength of our democracy isn't just about the strength of the government, and it is a very strong government. It's not just about the quality of the people in the government, and it is a very high quality government. It is also about having a credible opposition. And right now, they are not credible. They are just a mess. I think on 20 odd occasions over the course of the last 3 weeks, I've thought to myself, this couldn't possibly get worse for them. And on 20 odd occasions, I have been wrong, to the point where I'm now starting to doubt my own political judgment. But they continue to lurch from one egregious set of circumstances into another. The hole keeps getting deeper and deeper. And it looks like there'll be legal challenges after they finally kick Maura Deeming out. These issues don't, in fairness to them, don't stem just from the obvious discord within the Parliamentary Liberal Party. They actually stem from a whole bunch of pre-selection decisions, which reflect appallingly on the Liberal Party membership. The reality is they've allowed the hard right to get control of the show. They have pre-selected people with extremist views like Maura Deeming, like Renee Heath, in the past like Bernie Finn. They pre-selected these people and then have an awful time trying to manage them once they're part of the parliamentary process. The reality is all parliamentarians get a voice. They all get the ability to jump on their feet. They all get the ability to have a pulpit from which to talk about the issues that are important to them. And the people the Liberal Party continue to pre-select are so far away from the mainstream, so far at the fringe of mainstream political thinking, that they will continue to be beset by these problems until such time as they decide to return to being a party of the centre. And, right now we're the political beneficiaries of that, but it is undoubtedly not good for democracy to have an opposition that is that has drifted so far away from mainstream thinking.
And you've spoken about their pre-selection, kind of, I guess, how they're functioning. I guess, could you contrast that with the Labor Party? How do you get pre-selected to run in a seat? I think you've been the member for Burwood before. You're now the member for Ringwood. There was a redistribution that happened there. What does that actually look like to get people in, not just the general public, but in the actual branch, the people that are really committed to these sort of ideas? How do you get them along with you?
Sure. So, look, in the ordinary course of business, inside the Labor Party, we have a balance between the views of the local membership and the views of the party more broadly, as it's represented on a thing called the Public Office Selection Committee, POSC. The Liberal Party leave the entirety of their pre-selections to the branches, and that's frankly the reason they managed to end up with so many right-wing nut jobs in there is because the branches have been stacked out by groups like Christian fundamentalist groups and Mormons and the like. They've been stacked out, and that has allowed them to put up a whole bunch of people for pre-selection who frankly don't reflect mainstream values, and many of them don't even reflect the values of the Liberal Party. So inside the Labor Party, we have this more balanced approach. Now, in my personal circumstances, I didn't have a contested pre-selection when I ran for Burwood and won it. And then last time round, the last lot of pre-selections were determined centrally because the party was going through a painful, difficult and necessary period of democratic reform. We had the values of the party trashed by Adam Somyurek and some of his fellow travellers. That was an extraordinarily difficult period, but I'm very proud of the steps that the Premier took to set the thing right. And that has undoubtedly improved the health of our party. We now move into a phase where there'll be, more ordinary pre-selections, and members of the party in my part of the world, or even from outside of this area, are welcome to challenge me for pre-selection in the lead up to the 2026 election. But I hope that I'll have the support of the local membership and ultimately the support of the Public Office Selection Committee to continue doing this role.
And I'm really interested if you could take us to election night, the last election that came up. I was probably more leaning on the pessimistic side. I kind of thought there's enough COVID hangover here that the Labor Party will probably retain government, lose a couple of seats. And instead we just saw like this wave, whatever they want to call it in the Herald Sun these days, where a whole bunch of people that have never voted Labor before voted for it. How did you kind of reconcile that on the night in your own head, where you're in this popularity contest, people that probably don't have any reason to like you for some reason, and they put one next to your name? What does that feel like? What does that look like? And what were your thoughts on that night?
Sure. Look, I think some of the vote is won locally, and that is a reflection of people, the engaged part of the electorate, the very engaged part of the electorate, making some value judgments about me as a candidate with my history and my achievements. And my opponent, who comes from a very different part of the ideological spectrum to me, and there are plenty of people who formed a judgment about that and voted on that basis. But I think most of the election ultimately was about the leadership that Daniel Andrews and the Victorian government displayed right throughout the pandemic. And as much as there was a very, very, very noisy minority who were barking about all of the hardships, I think overwhelmingly the majority of Victorians accepted that they were necessary hardships, that the government did what it could in the circumstances facing it to protect people's health, to save lives, and to deal with an event that we simply didn't have a rule book for. 100 years or thereabouts since the last global pandemic, the world, of course, far more mobile than it was then, far more free moving, exchange of information, so many things vastly, vastly different to what they were in the 1920s. And I think Victorians ultimately said, look, difficult set of circumstances. Yep, mistakes were made, but fundamentally the government was motivated to do the right thing, and in fact did do the right thing.
And I'm conscious of the time, Will. I don't want to keep you for too long, but I saw on your Wikipedia page you're big on the Republic movement. This is a big pro-Republic channel. Can you give us the 30-second spiel? Why should we become a republic?
Australia's big enough and grown up enough to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. This nonsense of having an imported head of state, someone who isn't one of us, who doesn't live here, who doesn't share our values, is a historical relic. It is time for Australia to stand on its own feet, to move on, to determine that we are mature enough as a nation and as a body politic to elect one of our own to be our head of state. We as a nation cannot really be seen as being independent if we continue to have the King of England being the King of Australia. That is not something that I think sits well with migrant communities, with young people, with a whole bunch of people for a range of reasons. Australia's had a very long period of stable government, but I don't think that this is about the monarchy. I think it's about ultimately the democratic temperament of the Australian people, and moving to a president and a Republican style of government isn't going to change the democratic temperament of the Australian people. In fact, I think it will bolster it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Will, thanks again for all your time today, and I appreciate you going through these questions with me. Did you have any closing final thoughts? Anything you want to end on?
Look, I'm happy. I've actually got a few more minutes, Jack. If you want to add other things, but yeah. Is there anything in particular you want me to?
No, look, nothing in particular. I'm interested. I think in so if you've got time, when I walk onto the steps of Parliament, it really strikes me as a majestic place. It's kind of like walking into like a big cathedral or something like that. There's just this aura of the place that's there. Do you get tired of that? Is that does that wash away? It just becomes like the office? Is that?
You know, it's funny. We actually mainly come in the back door, so you actually don't see it very often. Like I've gone whole parliamentary weeks without actually having walked up the steps necessarily. Even if we go for lunch, sometimes you sort of come in the side gate. You don't kind of. But when I am out there, absolutely, it is an awesome building in the very literal sense of that word, and we do. I think most of us, overwhelmingly the majority of us, both sides of the aisle, have a sense of the responsibility we carrying the voices of our communities into that place. It is an enormous honour to serve my community in the district of Ringwood. It's an enormous honour to be one of 88 people representing their communities right across the state in the lower house of the Victorian Parliament, and it's something I think, particularly on the Labor side, we take seriously and work every day to deliver the absolute best we can for our communities.
And again, previously we spoke about these kind of individuals that are difficult to manage in certain parties. I guess my fear as a general kind of punter, a general observer, is that we're starting to see these sort of people branch out into their own, the DLP is being revived for some reason. There's lots of I guess, how do we structure our democracy so that when someone votes for what they think their values are, how do we make sure they actually get what they're asking for? And it's not just about them, it's about, promises and values and all these sort of things. I guess if you could reform the system, wave your little magic wand, how do you make sure that people actually get what they ask for?
Sure. Look, there are values voters. There are engaged voters around particular policy areas. There are voters who are less engaged who simply treat it as a referendum on the leadership of the Premier of the day. And there are voters who are completely disengaged and will vote for the first people who hand them a how to vote card. That's a challenge, I think, for all political parties to navigate. But for those engaged voters, I think, and the values voters, I think they typically have a pretty good read on who their local candidates are and what they stand for. The Labor Party is a party of democratic socialists and social democrats. We are a left of centre party, and we proudly stand on the values of inclusivity, equality, rights for workers. They're fundamental to the structure of the Australian Labor Party. The other parties, perhaps with the exception of the Greens, but the other parties tend to be a bit more freewheeling in terms of just how much unity of ideological purpose, I guess they have. And in particular, the modern Liberal Party is a hollowed-out shadow of its former self. Once upon a time, it was a party that could claim to be progressive on a range of, particularly on social matters, and it's just not that anymore. The leader of the opposition's having a crack at dragging it back to the centre, and he's being resisted by all of those interests that would much prefer to live a life in opposition, espousing their narrow right-wing extremist views. That's a great shame for them, but frankly, it doesn't distract us from our work, which is getting on and delivering for our communities.
Nah, good stuff. Glad to hear it, because I think the temptation is certainly there. If someone wants to jump in the mud, you jump in and wrestle with them. And my perception has been that hasn't happened, which I'm glad.
Well, a wise person said when your opponent is destroying themselves, the single best thing you can do is get out of the way. We are simply observers as the Libs tear themselves apart at the minute. They will eventually get their house in order and become
They will.
a more effective opposition. You know, I actually welcome that happening in some respects because it means we can get on with the business of governing and talking about our agenda rather than the media being obsessed with the ridiculous infighting and petty name calling going on inside their tent.
And I'll take us to a national issue just to close now.
Sure.
Obviously, the voice referendum is coming up. I think if we want to talk about getting in the mud, that's probably the next big example of where that's almost going to have to happen. Unfortunately, I wonder from a state level, how do you support that voice? I imagine it being the Labor Party, we are supporting the voice. How do you support that voice? How do you stay out of the mud while you do that? And how do you make sure that it's, I guess, the cleanest process it can be?
Well, the beauty of referenda campaigns as opposed to political campaigns, they're not about individuals. You know, this isn't a sort of Daniel Andrews versus Matthew Guy contest. It's not an Anthony Albanese versus ScoMo contest. This is a contest about a very simple proposition. Should we enshrine in our constitution the ability for Indigenous Australians to make representations at a formal level to the federal government and to the federal parliament? That's a very simple proposition. It is advisory only, and I frankly struggle to understand any of the objections to that very simple proposition. Yes, there will be people, many of them, you know, towards the right of the spectrum, but also people on the left who seek to tear down this process. I would say to them, and I would say to all of your viewers, this is an opportunity for us to start the journey of putting right that which has been done so very badly wrong over the course of the last 240 years, and I hope we take the opportunity to do it.
And if you want to learn more about those reasons that people are opposed to the voice, make sure you check in maybe next week, the week after. There'll be a new video up discussing exactly that and why those ideas aren't that good.
And in the meantime, check out yes23.com.au. All the great resources are there. An opportunity for lots of people to get involved in the campaign. A great opportunity for us as a party, I think, Jack, to reach out and enfranchise a whole bunch of people with a political campaign who mightn't have been engaged so much in party politics in the past.
Yep. 100% people can get behind it, even if they're, you know, Greens, Liberal, Labor. I think there's going to be a lot of cross-party support for this sort of thing. So looking forward to that. Will, thanks again for your time. Thanks for extending your time a little bit for me as well. Really appreciate it. Will Fowles, MP for Ringwood. Good bloke. What else? He's the good guy all around.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Will. See you, mate.
Catch you soon. Bye.